Hello.
Oh, hello.
I thought I saw you.
How are you?
Fine, thanks. Great turnout, isn't it?
Yes.
Where are they?
In a box in the stand. I don't think they can see us, Alex and his mother.
Don't telephone me anymore. Just rely upon my popping up.
Alfred Hitchcock's Notorious is a very emblematic film of Hitchcock's style, which has a certain kind of energy and tension and intrigue to it, but which is always encapsulated in the dynamics of shifting alliances, and in this case, back and forth in his love story, a sense of betrayal in it, and the surrounding characters entrapping the two lovers who essentially can't really reveal themselves. And I think Hitchcock, a signature of his work in a way, is this, despite what he said about actors and how he might have felt about actors, he actually fundamentally embedded one or two characters in all of his films as the central driving force. His sense of style was always subsumed into character. We don't think of Hitchcock as being an innovator or a groundbreaker in terms of creating new language of cinema. In a lot of ways, Hitchcock, from the very beginning, even you go back to his silent films like The Lodger, the images are classical. What he did was he used a lot of the existing techniques in a very individual way. One of the things that I find so distinguishing about Notorious is really actually not about the cinematography at all, as wonderful as it is, but of the script. It's a very sophisticated script that just kind of wonderful contrasting styles of dialogue that Ingrid Bergman and Cary Grant have. She's so open in so much of it, so vulnerable, so emotional, and he is so drawn in and so clipped in almost emotionless, especially, in the first half or two-thirds of the picture.
Well, handsome, I think you better tell Mama what's going on, or all this secrecy is going to ruin my little dinner. Come on, Mr. D, what is darkening your brow?
After dinner.
No, now.
It's one of the better screenplays, I think, in all of Hitchcock's films. And Roy Webb's score is so beautiful, and it almost kind of forecasts the same kind of tension and restrained energy that Bernard Herrmann had in some of the later scores.
Mr. Sebastian has the key for this, madame. It's the wine cellar.
Ted Tetzlaff's just luminous cinematography honors both the conceits of the thriller. On one hand, it's almost an early film noir, but it's also just so beautifully done. The lighting, so delicate and subtle in the classic Hollywood studio style. It almost evokes a Paramount or an MGM sheen to it, even though it's an RKO film, which are often associated with a kind of a tougher, more virile lighting style. Early in the film, after the opening scene where she gets drunk and she wakes up the next morning after the drive, and she sees this POV of Cary Grant, and he's kind of tilted, and he moves forward, and the camera straightens and tilts the other direction. He comes, he stands over her, she looks, and he's upside down. These are classic noir angles, and they're not things that Hitchcock did a lot. Hitchcock was not one for using a lot of those sort of deep focus, wide angle techniques that became part of the noir vocabulary, but we do see suggestions of it. Ted Tetzlaff started in the silent era. And in the early 30s, Tetzlaff photographed like a dozen films a year. And being able to work quickly and develop this sort of almost shorthand way of working where he could create a sense of just beautiful imagery, which was required by the studios in those days, is amazing. So by the time he got to Notorious, which was his last film as a director of photography, he'd shot well over 100 feature films. I mean, that's amazing. And it's interesting that it was such a studio-bound film. When he became a director from 1947 to 1957, he went completely in the opposite direction, and he went out into the streets. And his first movie, The Window, is really a street film and anticipated the whole genre of New York street films that we associate, starting with Naked City. When you go back to Notorious, Hitchcock was truly very focused on how the actors were introduced in his movies, where we first see them, and how we see them kind of forecasts how we're going to feel about them. And the fact that Ingrid Bergman is introduced straight on and the camera is with her gives us this real sense of empathy with her. And it's interesting because she's sort of lost in the crowd at first. But as soon as we see her and recognize her, the camera is dolling back, leading her with this gaggle of photographers, reporters coming up to her. And instead of cutting to a wide shot, we stay very close on her. And you immediately get the sense of the oppression on her, by just being with her and seeing all this stuff happen around her.
I'm very sorry. You all have to go. It has been a perfectly hideous party.
The fact that we don't see Cary Grant at all in the first scene, he becomes instantly a man of mystery. For the next half hour of the film, he's very enigmatic. We sense this growing love story, but it's hard to read him. And that's the conflict that plays with his character all the way through the film.
Haven't I seen you somewhere before? Well, it doesn't matter. I like party crashers.
He's not a party crasher. I brought him.
The opening party scene where Ingrid Bergman is hosting friends and we see Cary Grant in silhouette on the left side of the frame. It's like a 2.5-minute scene. It's one shot. The way we use these long takes today, or plan séquence as the French call it, is as a frame or an excuse to be bravura, to show the kind of pyrotechniques that the director and the cinematographer are capable of. Hey, look at me. Kind of fancy camera acrobatics. Hitchcock never did it for that reason, because I think he was very concerned with the kind of visual/emotional investment that you as the audience would have in the film as it unfolded and become totally invested in a sense of the real time. And one of the great things about the uninterrupted or the uncut shot is you're sitting there and you are experiencing the real time of the character in the scene. The focus is constantly on Ingrid Bergman, and it says very early in the film that this is the person who is the nodal point. She's the linchpin of the film.
Do you know something? I like you.
Well, I'll see you on board of L'Issue at 9 o'clock.
I think almost all of Hitchcock's style is grounded in the actual character and character revelation and character emotion. There are several times where there are scenes between Bergman and Cary Grant where the master shot is lit in a very nice classical style, but you move in for the single shots, and there is almost a complete violation of the integrity of that lighting when he puts a little spotlight on the face, with a shadow across it. And for me as a cinematographer, of course, it jumps out and says, that doesn't match at all. But it's very deliberate because they wanted you to just see the eyes in that emotional moment, I think.
Push me away.
I'm sorry to intrude on this tender scene.
Toward the end of the film, when Ingrid Bergman is being poisoned, that coffee cup is the chalice of her death, in a way. Madame Constantine, Claude Rains' mother, is poured the coffee, and she carries the coffee over, puts it on the table, the camera goes with her, we see the coffee cup, but then we tilt up to Ingrid Bergman's face. And it's always tied in, things like that, because the cup and then right to her face, and it just emotionally, this inert cup becomes a highly charged emotional thing by virtue of the fact that the shot is continued as a pan and a dolly, that there's not a cut. If there were a cut there, it would have created a different sense of a displacement. Well, props and pieces of set dressing and things like that really are important in Hitchcock because they seem to be objective, unemotive objects, but in fact, they become so tied into the dramatic situation of the actor. In North by Northwest, the famous sequence of Cary Grant out on the dusty road, the crop duster going back and forth seems so innocent, but it's set up perfectly because it becomes the instrument of what could be his death. And I think so often in noir, in a lot of classic thriller films, you always have the discovery scene where the plot and the resolution of it has to be explained through dialogue. That doesn't happen so much in Hitchcock. It's in the action, in the physical, maneuvering of objects. Toward the end of the film, when Claude Rains has come down the staircase with the key, and he kind of discovers the subterfuge. There are a lot of little cuts in there, the shards of the glass, the label on the wine bottles. But in a way, they become highly charged because they're tied in to the cuts of him, very tight close-ups of him, as he is putting the pieces together of what has happened and becomes very emotional. And that is pure Hitchcock, I think. The whole sequence tracking Ingrid Bergman stealing the key.
I just hope that nothing will happen to give him any false.
That key, it almost comes to life. It's a dramatic element. And the key shot down into her hand from a high-angle crane shot is one of the most famous shots in Hitchcock's films, with good reason, because it was very difficult to execute technically, which is why you don't see a shot that ambitious very often. Today, basically all cameras, whether they're film or digital cameras, are essentially reflex cameras. What we see when we look through the eyepiece is what we get. The older cameras had a viewfinder that you framed your shot in, but that is not what the camera was actually seeing. You would set up a shot looking through the lens, but when you actually did the shot, you had to rack the camera over so that the film itself lined up with the lens, but you couldn't see through the lens. It was black at that point. So the way you determined the composition was there was a side finder. The difference between what the lens actually saw and what the operator saw through the side finder was called parallax. When the object that you're photographing is far away, the side finder would kind of move in closer to the lens, so that at a distance there was very little disparity between what the lens saw and what the side finder saw. As you moved in close, the side finder would displace more to the side. And so it became more and more awkward to actually see what you were getting. And the operator could only determine sometimes whether he had the accurate composition at the end of the shot. When the director yelled cut, nobody would move. The camera would be racked over into the viewing position. The operator would look at the lens and decide whether the shot was properly composed and whether it was in focus. Okay. Now that was not such a big problem when the camera was dollying on the floor, because the camera assistant for focus could set marks on the floor determining the distance and rack the camera lens appropriately. When you're on a crane floating in the air, it's much more difficult. So this great shot starting at the top of the staircase and going down into the extreme close-up of the key in Bergman's hand, most of the camera move down happens in this sort of nether space that is kind of undefined. So what happened in this shot, as you get close to her hand, she gets pushed to the extreme right side of the frame, and the entire left side of the frame is empty space. As you get right to the end of the shot, she comes back into the center because the camera operator knew what the final composition should look like. But you'll notice, if you look at the shot carefully, 8 or 10 frames right before the camera stops, there's a little buzz in the focus. The camera operator would not have been able to know that. And that is a very common thing you see with crane shots in this pre-reflex camera era. But I don't think it was just a bravura shot. I think it was part of the whole visual design that Hitchcock has in his films about how to use different kinds of shots to create different kinds of emotional moments.
How am I doing?
Not bad.
Scared?
No,
No. No, you're not scared of anything.
not too much.
Hitchcock did not like to go on location, and he liked things to be done in the studio. There are practical reasons why you might want to use rear projection, especially in that studio era where equipment was so heavy and so difficult to transport over distances, especially like going to South America in Rio. So shooting, rear process, not only might have been a budget factor, but of course it was a comfort factor. Also, he had such, complete control there. And part of that control is that by using process plates, he would be able to control the style a lot more. He wasn't prey to all the vicissitudes that happen when you're out on the street. The French New Wave films embraced the chaos of the street and the lack of control of the street. When I became a cinematographer after years as an assistant and operator, I actually used some rear projection. And it required a very large stage because we had to have your set in the foreground. Then you had a big screen behind the actors that would contain the projected plate. And then behind that, because the screen was essentially translucent, you had a projector at the other end of the stage that was projecting from behind the process plate. So it could not be done on a small stage. Greg Toland is said to have shot the process plates in Rio de Janeiro. Although he's uncredited, and these are the plates we see in downtown when Cary Grant and Ingrid Bergman are meeting in the park on the bench and so forth, Hitchcock used plates all the way through his career. And they were very effective in black and white films because of the kind of abstraction of the black and white. But when you got to the color era, in his color movies, I think not only did he become less technically sort of concerned about the plates, but the color became more difficult to control. And you'd have a color disparity between the plates and the color temperature of the plates and the foreground action. I don't think he was concerned with it at that time. As a matter of fact, you could almost make a case that given Hitchcock's predilection for technique, that having the plates themselves not being convincing was actually part of the artifice of the whole style that he used in film. And if you look carefully at the park scenes and especially the cafe scenes in Notorious, the plates really look squirrely, not technically, but in terms of the focus. There seems to be very little real life correspondence, for what I know as a cinematographer, between the focus on the actors and how we would expect the background to fall out of focus.
Why don't you give that copper's brain of yours a rest? Every time you look at me, I can see it running over its slogans. Once a crook, always a crook. Once a tramp, always a tramp. Go on.
Now, whether Tetzlaff and Hitchcock actually had the projector on the RP plate thrown more out of focus to make it more abstract, I'm not sure. But I've always felt that there was very little sense in Hitchcock films all the way through that there was an attempt to create an illusion of real space and of real depth of field in his process plates, where other filmmakers really tried to make them convincing. I think it was just part of Hitchcock's maybe perversity that he just either didn't care or he wanted the audience to be so invested in the emotional life of the actors that he wanted the background to be out of focus.
I told you that's the assignment.
Well, now, don't get sore there. I'm only fishing for a little bird call from my dream man.
Another element to his style, he liked to kind of reprise or recall images or stylistic conceits that he had established earlier in the film. When Ingrid Bergman first arrives at Claude Rains' house, there's that classic Hitchcock establishing shot that is a composite shot of the car driving up the little winding road at night and stopping. And in the deep background, we see the moon on the water. It's a complete artifice shot, but it's beautifully done. The camera is on the driver's side, and we're looking through the car. She gets out, and she's blocked temporarily, standing up. The camera booms up on the dolly, comes up above the car, and we see her start to walk in to the house up the stairs. So it was this little lift from the car up into revealing the house. At the end of the film, when Cary Grant is helping her come down the stairs, we're on a crane, and we follow them from the door, pulling back on the crane, down the steps, and as they get to the car, the camera booms down, repeating in the opposite direction that move when she first arrived at the house. So it's an inversion, and we look through the car again from the driver's side, and she leaves the house from the way the camera moved when she first arrived. It creates a kind of subliminal imprint. We associate Hitchcock's films almost from the very beginning with a kind of meticulous sense of planned choreography of images and of camera. And when we see a specific camera move tied into an arrival or a departure or something like that, from the beginning of the film to the end of the film, I think there is a sense of kind of some sort of emotional recall.
Alex, will you come in, please? I wish to talk to you.
I'm attracted to seeing Notorious over and over again because it is not a singular style movie. It embodies the glamorous and the sheen elements of classic Hollywood lighting with a kind of darker edge. And one of the things I think that makes Notorious stand out is the sheer humanity of it, the sense of people trapped and not able to reveal themselves in a very unusual love story.